Good morning, everybody. Justin Dunaway here with the Institute of Clinical Excellence. And today I want to talk about pain science from a foundation versus intervention standpoint. As you read the research and as you look at the forums on Facebook and Twitter, we see there's a lot of conversation back and forth about whether pain science education, pain science is something you do to somebody or it's a foundation that you base your practice on. So I want to dive into that a little bit, but let's frame it around a study. So I read this cool study last week that's called Pain Neuroscience Education and Therapeutic Exercise for Patients with Chronic Low Back Pain. Single blind randomized controlled trial. It was done in late 2017, and I'll throw a link to it in the comment section under this. But basically, so this is a study that looked at pain science education versus pain science education and exercise alone. They had 56 people. It was a really simply done study. They basically had 2 one-on-one sessions, and if you were in the exercise group, they came in, they taught you their exercises, looked to make sure you're doing them right, and then said do these every day for a month, and we'll check back in. 1 month, they had another check-in. They tweaked their exercises, had to do this every day for 2 more months, and then at the 3-month mark, we're going to look at pain and disability and pain pressure thresholds and range of motion and all that stuff. If you were in the education group, you got the same 2 sessions, but on the front end of each of those sessions, you got a 30 to 50 minute session of pain neuroscience education. It was based on some of the stuff from Mosley's Explain Pain book and the Pain and Motion website. So you either got 2 sessions of exercise or 2 sessions of exercise plus neuroscience education, and then 3 months of daily HEP. So the education piece is based on some of Mosley's stuff and based on some good neurophysiology websites. And then the exercises, what everybody got for their chronic back pain was they had supine transverse abdominis activation. And then once they got that down, they went prone and did transverse abdominis and multifidus co-contractions. And then they moved into seated posture correction with transverse abdominis and multifidus co-contractions. They had 2 stretches, as a piriformis and a flexion stretch, and then they did a 20 to 30 minute walk every day. So that's the exercise program, and then the education program. Right. So at the end of the 3 months, what they found is that pain improved in both groups. They got people moving, and they hurt a little bit less. It was good. And then in the neuroscience education group, they had stronger improvements in pain, and they also had improvements in their disability scores, their range of motion, and their pain pressure threshold tests. So we saw changes in some of the central nervous system stuff, as well as range of motion disability, just by adding a little bit of the education into that exercise program. Now, when we look at this study, there's a couple things that we should think about here. First of all, so there's essentially 3 things that jump in my head as we talk about this study. First one is that it's really, really difficult to study large groups of persistent pain patients. All of us that treat persistent pain patients in the clinic know that every single one is very variable. Everybody is very different. And the same can be said for really any condition, but really in our chronic pain population, the things that contribute to chronic pain are wildly different from patient to patient to patient. So anytime we read any of these studies, we got to keep in the back of our head that it's not really a homogeneous group. The other thing we got to think about is when we think about pain education, and it goes back to this original question, foundation or intervention, is pain science and intervention? And then the third thing is, when we think about pain science as an intervention, it needs to be launched, and I'm going to dive into this in a minute, it needs to be launched from a pain science foundation. So the first thing is, one of the things that we see people say a lot is that pain science is not an intervention. And I agree, except that when we're doing a pain science-like intervention, we have to, or an intervention that comes from pain science, we have to think about it as an intervention, right? When we think about pain science education, it's important that we think about it as an intervention in our head when we're delivering it. And what do I mean by that? Why? Well, what do we do with our interventions? What do we do with our exercise interventions when we have a patient in front of us? We individualize it. We scale it. we grade it. We make it appropriate to the patient in front of us. We listen to their story, we hear their history, we get an idea of their irritability, their capabilities, their current functional movements, and we pick things that are appropriate for them. We pick an appropriate starting point, and then we grade that over time, right? That's how we do an intervention. So if we think about pain science education as an intervention, we can use those same concepts when we're delivering them to our patients, right? We're really good at understanding that when a patient walks in the door with back pain, some patients, when they come in on that initial session, they're totally appropriate to start some deadlifts and squats day one. But there's other patients that walk in the door with back pain, and if we started there, it would be an absolute disaster. And those patients, maybe we start doing some supine flexion stuff, some graded exposure, add some things into the program, break it down, and build them back up, right? But when we think about education, when we think about talking to our patients about things that are different from their current beliefs, we tend to start everybody with heavy squats day one. Instead of understanding where the patient's at, understanding what the patient believes in, breaking that down and sprinkling in little bits of education, individualizing it to the patient's story, and grading it over time. Right, so when we think about teaching our patients about pain, if we think about it as an intervention, it lends us to grade, scale, and make it more appropriate for each patient. Right, but that's only going to be effective if it's launched from a foundation that's strong in pain science, right? So this is that third point. The pain science, the interventions need to be launched from a pain science foundation. So that's true for education, but it's true for anything that we think about that's more centrally neurophysiologic based, right? So if we're doing laterality or motor imagery or mirror boxes or graded exposure to specific or global movements or pain education, if the intervention doesn't match the foundation, there's going to be a mismatch. That's a problem, right? So let's think about this study. What is the education piece telling the patient? Well, if it's coming from Explain Pain and Pain in Motion website, it's probably talking about hurt isn't harm, pain isn't damage. It's talking about humans are amazing and resilient and versatile, and the spine is strong, and we need to move and do all this stuff. And it really delivers a message of independence, hope, resilience, internal locus of control. What does the exercise intervention in this study tell patients? Well, what are we doing? We're activating TRA in neutral. We're co-contracting TRA and multifidus in neutral. We're correcting posture. It delivers a message that the spine is. It may not be the intention of the researchers, but the message of those exercises to the patient is that the spine is fragile, the spine is damaged, the spine needs protected, the spine needs protected through movement, and movement is threatening if we're not, or movement is a potential source of damage if we're not protecting our patient, right? So while the education piece is from a neurophysiologic standpoint, the intervention, the exercise intervention, isn't, and there's a total mismatch. When we think about the things, when we think about where pain comes from, the mature organism model, you've got peripheral input, you've got external context, and you've got internal context, right? So the exercises are designed to manage peripheral, or the peripheral input, but if the exercises themselves contribute to the context that increases the threat of the system, it's got the potential to increase pain, right? So our exercise interventions and our education interventions have to match each other. And the only way they're going to match is if we've got a strong foundation in neuroscience, right? So what we've got to think about there is that, every intervention, whether it's education, whether it's exercise, whether it's laterality or localization discrimination, it has to come from a strong foundation in a psychologically informed, neurophysiologic-based foundation, right? So this study, if it was written like that, if the study gave you a good exercise intervention, a good education intervention that came from a foundation of neuroscience, it would maybe look more like the education piece would be the same, but maybe the exercises were based more on the patient, because we know from enough studies in the Cochrane Review and meta-analysis that specific exercise is just as good as general exercise for back pain. So patients with chronic back pain that come in, and we say, okay, tell me your story. And we hear what they're currently doing, what they currently can't do, what they wish they could do if they felt better, get an idea of their current fitness status, find out the things that they enjoy doing, and tailor that program to the stuff that they enjoy doing without giving them, exercises or messages that make them believe that they're fragile, they're broken, they need protected, would make much more sense. So, long story short, if we have, if our intervention and our foundation both come from pain science, pain science, if we think about pain science as an intervention and as a foundation, it's always and, not or. Then it gives us a much better opportunity to match intervention, match our plan of care, match the way that we approach patients to every patient through the door. It should be individualized. Every treatment should look wildly different for every patient through the door, right? So the stronger our psychologically informed neurophysiologic foundation, the better we're going to be at developing these programs that make more sense for our persistent pain patients. And remember, at the end of the day, it's all about the context. It's all about what we're delivering and the way we deliver it, right? So when we're treating patients in the clinic, we've got to ask ourselves, does the context, does the intention of the perceived, does the intention or perceived intention of our exercise, of our plan of care, of our interventions, sync with the education that we're treating, or we're giving our patients? Are we telling the patients that they're strong, that they're resilient, that the human body is this amazing thing that has this huge capacity to heal, and humans can do all this great stuff? Is this the education that we're delivering? Then does our interventions match those things? All right, so when you're in the clinic and you're thinking about your patients and you're thinking about your education that you're sprinkling in, and you've identified their beliefs and expectations, and you're working to change these things over time, you also got to look at your program and make sure that the stuff that you're doing matches the stuff that we're telling the patients to believe. So, at the end of the day, when we think about pain science and we think about pain science education, it isn't foundation versus education. Pain science education is absolutely a intervention. And it's an intervention that's got a lot of research behind it, that's powerful, that works well, but will only work well if it's launched from a psychologically informed neurophysiologic foundation. So yes, pain science education is an intervention, but pain science also needs to be the foundation that it's launched from. And not or, guys, all day long. All right, let's go out in the clinic, heal some people, and have a happy 4th of July tomorrow.